Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This is kind of a booktube darling that I think most people who regularly watch booktube have heard of quite a bit, but a summary in case you've somehow missed ever hearing about this book. This is an adult sci-fi fantasy novel about two college roommates who discover how to become EOs, extraordinaries. They essentially wind up with superpowers, they both become supervillains, and then arch enemies of each other. It's a very cool premise if you like superhero type things, and I think for me that was kind of where the issue started because I'm not the biggest fan of superhero storylines. Not that I dislike them, I'm pretty much fine with them, which is kind of how I felt about this book. I gave it 3 stars, and superheroes to me just seem kind of repetitive at this point, which is not a bad thing. If you like what they're doing, if you like superhero storylines, this is definitely a book you should try to pick up because it was very interesting. But as someone who's not very into superheroes, this book did feel like it was repeating a lot of the same superhero tropes that we see over and over again, especially when you look at superheroes that are more into the morally gray, everyone's a villain superhero. This book was kind of that, and it was interesting. I did give it 3 stars. I did enjoy it. I just kind of wish I'd enjoyed it more than I did because I know this is like a favorite for everyone on BookTube, and so many people treat this book like it's the second coming, and I really wanted to love it. But as someone who's not very into superheroes, it fell a little flat just like story-wise for me. I did want to open with that because this isn't the kind of book I would ordinarily pick up. I read it for the Literary Alliance book club that I'm a part of. They chose this book and I read it because of that. My other big issue that kind of did impact me a lot more than just not being into superheroes was the fact that this is not a chronologically told story. We constantly jump back and forth between Victor and Eli's time as roommates in college as they discover how to become extraordinaries, and the future where Victor has just gotten out of prison and he's hunting down Eli. And the fact that we flipped back and forth between those two timelines, and even flipped back and forth between a few different characters at other points and their histories, it was a lot for me to handle. It felt very jumbled to me, and I had a very difficult time like putting the pieces back together. And that doesn't bother a lot of people, apparently. I kind of thought it would, but it is something that affects me a lot when reading a book. I much prefer linear storytelling. And like my brain just can't take all these different pieces and put them in the order that they're supposed to be. Another thing that played into that was how short the chapters are. All these chapters are only a couple of pages for the most part, and because they were so short and combined with the jumping back and forth through timelines, it made it really difficult for me to follow this book, and I do think I would have liked it a lot more had it not been quite so jumbled. I just find that storytelling style frustrating overall, and I know a lot of people don't, and I think if you don't find that frustrating and you do like superheroes a bit more than I do, this is definitely one to check out because I really enjoyed her writing style. Like, just her writing style, not the storytelling, not the plot, not the characters, just her writing was really lovely to read. It was very descriptive, but in a very frank and straightforward kind of way. It wasn't lyrical, it wasn't flowery, it was just descriptive. And I really enjoyed that because I do like lyrical writing. I think it's very lovely to read. But you can also be very descriptive without being lyrical. And I don't know, she illustrated that very well here, and I really enjoyed reading it. And just based on her writing style, I really want to try some other books that she's written, because I do feel like a different story, a different storytelling style, and I would definitely enjoy her a lot more. I feel like if it hadn't been told in a non-chronological way, this might have been a 4-star read for me instead of 3, but that really did impact my ability to enjoy this story and to kind of sink into it. Everyone also talks about the characters in this and how they love the morally gray characters and they think it's so interesting and unique. And I feel like because I don't read a lot of good versus evil stories, I read a lot of realistic fiction that kind of deals with humanity and the complex nature of it, which is a pretentious way to put it, but I read a lot of books, and I prefer reading books that deal with like everyone has flaws, everyone's a screwed up person, everyone can be the villain. So to me, the morally gray characters and the fact that they were both villains, it was fine. Like, there was nothing bad about it, but for me it wasn't anything special either. It was just kind of like a part of the story. It didn't really stand out. But again, I don't read a whole lot of fantasy. I don't read a lot of good versus evil and that kind of thing, where if you read a lot of that, I think this would be different, and I do think it's very interesting in that regard. But I already read a lot of that, so it didn't really stand out in that way. Like, the characters were interesting, but they weren't spectacular for me, the way I think they are for a lot of other people. I also just kept comparing this book in my head to X-Men. And I don't know that much about X-Men, but I had seen like a few of the movies, and this is the kind of thing where it really wouldn't surprise me if this had started as like an X-Men fanfic, or if it was inspired by X-Men, because it did feel incredibly similar in like the way their mutations were treated and the government aspect, and just a lot of aspects of this book really reminded me of X-Men, and I think that's why I don't like superhero stories very much. It's because they always remind me very closely of something else, because there's really only so much you can do with the superhero narrative, and I'm just not really a huge fan of that. Like, I'll sit down, I'll watch the Marvel movies and be perfectly fine with them, but they're not spectacular standouts to me. So, if you like that kind of thing, if you like X-Men, this is an interesting take on it. It's just not something that I personally am very interested in. The last small point I had was something really, really minor that kept popping up throughout the story, and it's like the only really nitpicky thing in this review. Victor, the main character, keeps sensing things. Like, he doesn't see it, he doesn't physically feel it, he doesn't hear it. He'll just like know something. He'll be like, oh, I feel it in the air, or I can like hear the echoes and tell that we've entered a different room that has fewer furniture. And some of that I do expect in books. Like, yeah, when you walk into a place, you can kind of like get a feel for it, even if you're blindfolded or whatever. But it happened a lot in this book, and it kind of happened to the extent that halfway through I started rolling my eyes at it. Like, it's a very minor thing. It didn't bother me that much, but it did kind of give me a giggle once it was happening so much, because it did happen a lot. And I know that's really minor, I know that's really nitpicky, but it was something that really stood out to me enough that I like made a note about it. But yeah, overall, this book was fine, this book was okay. I think if it sounds like your kind of thing, like if the story itself sounds very interesting to you, I would highly recommend picking it up, because again, it's not super my thing, but that doesn't make it bad. It's just doing something that I don't particularly enjoy. So if you're intrigued by the story or the characters or anything like that, definitely go give it a try, because I think you'd really enjoy it. It just wasn't for me at the end of the day. Let me know down below how much you disagree with me, because I know like everyone gives Vicious 4 or 5 stars. I'm not going to be reading Vengeful, which is the sequel, just because I have heard that in terms of the non-chronological storytelling, it's much, much worse. But I do really plan to pick up something else by V.E. Schwab, because I did enjoy her graphic writing style. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.